Story 1. The Vanished Banker of Lima, a financial web unraveled. You may never have heard of Luis Alberto Rivas, but in the corridors of Lima's financial district in the early 1990s, his name moved millions. By all accounts, Rivas was a quiet man, diligent, well-dressed, precise. He rarely raised his voice, rarely appeared in the press, and when he walked, it was always with measured calm, almost mathematical, as if every step were plotted on an invisible grid. But on the morning of April 17, 1993, Luis Rivas vanished. Without a note, without a call, without taking a single item from his apartment in the affluent district of San Isidro. And in the days that followed, a strange silence descended over Lima's financial elite. Because you see, Luis wasn't just any banker. He was the last known controller of nearly $42 million in dormant offshore investments tied to 3 collapsed banks' money that was, according to public records, unaccounted for. And he was gone. The man behind the ledger. Luis was born in 1956 in Arequipa, a southern Peruvian city known for its colonial architecture and white volcanic stone. He was the son of a notary and a homemaker, humble, but respected people in a town where reputation mattered. He moved to Lima at age 18 to attend the Universidad del Pacifico, where he graduated with top honors in accounting and economics. Within a decade, he was managing risk for Banco de Crédito del Sur. People who worked with him describe a man obsessed with balance sheets, someone who could find a missing cent like it was a loose thread on a suit jacket. He was the kind of man you didn't notice at parties, but who always knew where your wallet was. In 1989, Peru's financial system was unraveling under inflation, failed privatizations, and rampant corruption. Several banks collapsed. Depositors lost everything. But a few, including Rivas, stayed afloat. Not just afloat, they moved silently through the wreckage like deep-sea creatures in black water. When Banco Union closed in 1990, Luis had already transferred key clients to a Panama-based holding company. When Banco Metropolitano was nationalized in 1991, Rivas had quietly shifted funds out months earlier, allegedly to a Cayman Islands trust. There were no formal charges, no headlines, no lawsuits, just whispers. So when he disappeared in 1993, it wasn't just a man who was missing. It was a network. The last known day. At precisely 7:13 a.m. on April 17, the security guard at the Torre San Pedro building logged Luis entering the lobby. He nodded to the concierge, paused briefly by the cafe on the mezzanine, as he did every Saturday, and took the elevator to the 18th floor, a private suite leased by a boutique investment firm where Luis acted as a consultant. That suite remained locked until the cleaning staff arrived at 10:45. Luis was gone, but his briefcase remained on the table. His coffee, half full, sat untouched next to a folder marked confidential, SEC filings. His car was still parked underground, keys inside. There were no signs of struggle, no security alerts, no broken glass, no suspicious entries in the building's visitor log. It was as if he had stood up mid-sip and stepped into vapor. A ripple through the quiet. When Luis didn't return calls that weekend, colleagues assumed he was at his beach home in Punta Negra. But by Monday, unease had grown. His secretary contacted his sister, who lived in Miraflores. She hadn't heard from him. Calls to friends all fruitless. By Tuesday, April 20, a missing persons report was filed with the Policía Nacional del Peru. And by Friday, journalists caught wind. That's when the first real questions started forming, because missing people were, unfortunately, not rare in early 90s Peru, but missing bankers, quiet ones who handled dirty money and never got caught, that was different. Especially when whispers began circulating that Luis had met with foreign officials just days before vanishing people from the U.S. Treasury. It was said. Others claimed he was about to blow the whistle on an off-the-books slush fund connected to a former president. One particularly persistent rumor insisted that Lewis had been acting as a triple agent laundering money for drug cartels while feeding information to both Peruvian and U.S. intelligence. And yet, none of it could be proven. The police, pressured by both private interests and political powers, treated the case as voluntary disappearance. They closed the file within 6 weeks. But not everyone moved on. The numbers that didn't add up. Private investigator Marcela Yanez was hired by a group of concerned investors who had worked with Lewis in the late 80s. She wasn't just any detective. She had once worked fraud for Interpol and had contacts in Bogota, Panama City, and Miami. Marcela didn't believe Lewis simply ran away. He left behind too much bank accounts, property, personal effects. His passport was still at home. His life was unfinished. Her first finding was innocuous but curious. Lewis had, in the weeks before his disappearance, withdrawn small amounts of cash from 5 different banks, no more than 800 sols at a time. Not enough to fund a getaway, but perhaps enough to test if someone was watching. She then discovered a series of calls made to unlisted numbers in Ecuador, all within a 36-hour span during the first week of April. The numbers traced to a mobile network used exclusively by a now-defunct logistics firm accused of moving contraband for the Rodriguez-Orjuela cartel. And finally this. On the night before his disappearance, Lewis met briefly with a retired Army colonel, Jacinto Morales, at a private club in Surco. The colonel refused to speak when questioned. 4 months later, Colonel Morales was found dead in his apartment. Apparent overdose, no foul play. What happens when the money vanishes, too? By 1994, nearly $20 million once associated with Lewis's investment clearinghouse had evaporated from ledgers. Not stolen, not fraudulently claimed, just gone. Numbers shifted, assets reassigned, trusts dissolved. The paper trail had been severed with the precision of a surgeon. Some accounts were moved to Belize. Others went through Liechtenstein. Some were folded into property holdings under shell corporations in Dubai. To this day, no single authority has been able to piece together the full financial puzzle Luis Rivas managed or manipulated. But one thing is certain. Whoever helped cover those tracks knew what they were doing. And they probably didn't leave him a choice. A city that forgot, and those who didn't. Llama continued. The banks rebuilt. The skyline thickened. And the story of the quiet banker who vanished faded like the morning mist off the coast. But not everyone forgot. Luis's sister, Natalia Rivas, still keeps his apartment untouched down to the leather folder on the nightstand containing his last known will, which makes no mention of a planned disappearance. No hint of guilt, just instructions to water the bonsai tree he kept near the window. And on the wall beside it, a single framed quote attributed to Baltasar Gracian. The truth is generally seen, rarely heard. More than 30 years have passed since Luis Rivas walked into that tower and never came out. Some believe he was silenced. Others think he ran possibly under a new name, new face, new life. Maybe in Paraguay, maybe in Serbia. But the question remains, what did he know that was worth $42 million? And his silence. When a man disappears, people often look for signs of life, a transaction, a call, a camera that caught a glimpse. But in the case of Luis Rivas, the clues didn't lead to life. They led into layers, paperwork, portfolios, closed doors, and coded numbers. And the further the investigators looked, the more it seemed that Rivas hadn't disappeared. He had been erased. A quiet noise in Panama. In September of 1993, 5 months after the banker vanished, a quiet clerk at a Panama City law office named Julieta Mendoza flagged something unusual. A Cayman Islands-based trust, managed through a Panamanian proxy company called Silo Partners Limited, had requested the liquidation of several mid-size real estate holdings in Colombia and Peru. The request had come via a fax signed simply LR, and the instruction was to dissolve all known assets of Lucentia Holdings, a name linked in closed-door financial circles to Luis Rivas. Julieta wasn't a whistleblower. She didn't call the police. What she did instead was scribble a note to her supervisor. Didn't Mr. Rivas die? Her supervisor didn't respond. The liquidation went through. It wouldn't be until a year later that this information reached Marcela Yanez, the private investigator, through an encrypted message forwarded from a Panamanian attorney. And by then, the assets were gone. Cracks in the official story. The Peruvian police had closed the file on Luis Rivas with little fanfare. There was no body, no crime scene, no evidence of abduction. Their final report read in its entirety: Desaparición voluntaria sin signos de violencia, caso cerrado. Voluntary disappearance, case closed. But Marcela was far from done. She had spent nearly 9 months compiling a dossier of irregularities. Some were minute, like the misreporting of travel dates on Luis's ID card renewal application. Others were enormous, like the inexplicable transfer of $1.2 million from a bank account in Montevideo to a Luxembourg branch under the alias Armando L. Rivera, with a passport number that matched none in any Peruvian registry. It wasn't just that Rivas had the money and the means to vanish. It was that he had help. Marcela suspected the fingerprints of a particular player, the Inteligencia Financiera del Estado, a quiet arm of the Peruvian government, formed to deal with laundering and black funds during the economic crises of the 80s. And within that shadowy agency, one name appeared more than once: General Luis Edmundo Vargas, the man who didn't testify. General Vargas was a warhorse, decorated, trusted, and comfortably retired by 1993, but files connected him in the mid-1980s to operations targeting bank corruption and currency smuggling operations that Rivas would have likely touched, directly or indirectly, as a consultant during his early banking years. Marcela reached out to the general for an interview. She received no reply. Then, a few weeks later, someone broke into her small office in Barranco. Nothing was taken, but her files on the Rivas case had been shuffled. Her safe had been opened, but not empty. It was a message. And a week after that, the general died in a single-car accident on a road near Chosica. He had no living heirs. His military files were sealed. If General Vargas had any connection to Rivas's disappearance, he took it to the grave. But the pattern was beginning to show. Strange threads in Miami. In early 1994, Marcela followed a new Lead A series of wire transfers from dormant Peruvian accounts to First Shore Bank in Miami. The names on the accounts were unfamiliar. The pattern was not. One account held under the name Eduardo Fuentesp received a transfer of $88,702 weeks before Rivas disappeared. That same amount was later moved to a real estate investment fund that purchased several apartment buildings in the Little Havana district. Marcela flew to Miami and found the building listed under a new owner, E.F. Rivera Holdings. She requested property records. The signature on the deed, though slightly altered, showed remarkable similarities to Luis Rivas's known handwriting. More importantly, it bore a curious flourish A looping R in the middle of the signature, identical to how Luis had signed his contracts in Lima. The notary who had processed the deed, an older Cuban man named Reynaldo Izquierdo, remembered the buyer. He described a soft-spoken man, Latin American accent, thin-rimmed glasses, mid-40s. He called himself Ricardo Fuentes, said he was Ecuadorian, paid cash. Marcela showed him a photo of Rivas from 1992. Reynaldo nodded. That's him, no doubt in my mind. A life rebuilt or a shadow maintained. Marcela returned to Lima shaken. She had found something most investigators never do: not a body, not a confession, but a survival. Rivas had, by all accounts, started a new life in the United States, possibly under protection, possibly under threat. But that begged a different question. What did he leave behind? If he was willing to disappear, to give up his name, his history, his family, it meant that something or someone made the cost of staying higher than the cost of running. Natalia's story. Back in Lima, Luis's sister, Natalia, had grown more guarded. Reporters had stopped calling, and she avoided interviews, but she agreed to speak to Marcela once more. He wasn't perfect, she said, but he wasn't a coward. Natalia believed her brother had uncovered something in the final months of his consulting work. He had become distant, paranoid. He had begun encrypting even personal documents, carrying 2 phones, and had installed locks on his home safe that even she couldn't open. Luis had also changed his will. The last draft never officially filed, but typed and signed mentioned the name of a young lawyer, Andrea Morales, unknown to anyone in his professional or personal circles. Marcela tracked Andrea down in Chiclayo, working at a small legal clinic. She admitted to having briefly assisted Rivas on offshore asset protections, but claimed to know nothing of his disappearance. What she did offer was a copy of a sealed envelope Luis had left with her, in case anything happened. Inside was a single note, handwritten in small, neat lines. "They think I'll run. I won't, but I need time. They've already taken one person close to me. If I disappear, follow the signatures, not the trails. Misdirection is the oldest form of survival." Eldar. Marcela took a long breath when she read that. It meant Luis had not disappeared without warning. He had known what was coming. He had been preparing, and perhaps he had left more than just misdirection. The puzzle left for someone. In her final review of the case files, Marcela circled one phrase over and over in her notebook. Follow the signatures. If Luis had truly hidden what he knew, and if those secrets were buried in shell companies, forged deeds, and trust documents, then his trail wouldn't be in the places people were looking. It would be in the patterns. The curves of an R, the placement of a semicolon in a memo, the name of a company that appeared in 3 separate countries under slightly altered spellings, the silence of people who should have asked questions. By the end of 1994, Marcela closed her active investigation, but she never considered the case solved. Luis Rivas was never declared legally dead. Interpol has never issued a red notice under his name. And his sister still receives one envelope every Christmas, no return address, just a small Peruvian coin inside. So if Luis Rivas disappeared to hide from danger, or if he was forced to disappear because of what he found, then what was it that he found? The disappearance of Luis Rivas was not simply a personal vanishing act. It became something else, a whisper that stretched across borders, echoing through financial records, shadow accounts, and the memories of those who knew him. And even now, decades later, that echo hasn't stopped. This is the story of what happens when a man doesn't just disappear, but leaves behind a design. A discreet whisper in Brussels. In 1999, 6 years after Rivas vanished, a routine audit flagged unusual movement in a European Union anti-corruption task force budget. A Romanian intelligence analyst identified multiple shell corporations receiving funds from dormant South American accounts. The names of these corporations, Solar and Trust, Calaza Holdings, Triadica Banca, matched those tied to the Lucentia network from Marcela Yanez's investigation. These weren't coincidences. These were fingerprints. The report, classified at the time, made a single cryptic note. Structure resembles Latin American financial conduits pre-1993, possibly Rivas associated. Surprising activity level for presumed deceased party. Presumed deceased. That detail matters because officially, Luis Rivas was not declared dead, but unofficially in bureaucratic systems, he was treated that way, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. Was someone using his name, his network, and his reputation to continue laundering operations under the assumption no one would be looking? Or was he somewhere out there, still running it all himself? A meeting in Buenos Aires. In 2003, Marcela, semi-retired and living in Cusco, received a call from an Argentine investigative journalist named Emilio Pease. He had been working a story on ex-dictators, hidden fortunes, and had stumbled across an unexpected link. A trust fund created in Uruguay, managed through an office in Malta, with a controlling interest listed under a man named Luis Alberto R. What stopped him cold was the beneficiary, Natalia Rivas. He thought it might be a coincidence, but after reading Marcela's earlier reporting, he realized it was. The account had quietly grown to nearly $3.2 million, untouched for years. Marcela contacted Natalia. She was stunned. She had no knowledge of the fund, no recollection of ever signing anything. But she also said something odd. The week before he vanished, she recalled, Luis told me, if anything ever happens, you'll be taken care of. Just don't ask questions you won't want the answers to. Natalia never touched the money. To this day, it sits in an offshore account, frozen by the Uruguayan Central Bank under dispute. The analyst who dug too deep. In 2009, a financial compliance officer at a Swiss private bank, whose name was never made public, was terminated after flagging 3 accounts with mirrored transactional behavior to dormant Peruvian banking structures. In his exit interview, he told colleagues he believed those accounts were ghost-controlled, meaning no active card usage, no withdrawals, just slow internal transfers through 6 or more layers of intermediaries. All of them ultimately linked back to a known tax shelter used by South American officials in the early 90s. The man disappeared shortly after, relocating, it is believed, to Southeast Asia. He refused interviews. No paper trail was ever recovered, but a redacted version of his findings was leaked to the Geneva Record, and buried in it was a name. Client code, LAR057R/alias, Rivera, L/status, active as of Q2 2008. LAR Rivera, active. Almost 15 years after Luis Rivas had vanished. Legacy or ghost? The deeper you go into Luis Rivas's case, the less it feels like a disappearance and more like an eclipse. Something stepped in front of the truth, casting shadows. But behind it, something still glows. His legacy is difficult to quantify. To bankers, he was the whisper of how you move money when no one is watching. To investigators, he became a case study in strategic vanishing, disappearing in such a way that the appearance of disappearance becomes the only thing that distracts people from where the real activity is happening. And to his family, he remains both present and absent, a ghost with a pulse. Natalia once said, "I stopped wondering where he is. I started wondering who he became." A caution etched in silence. Marcela Yanez passed away in 2017. Before her death, she wrote a personal journal, portions of which were made public by her niece. In one entry, dated December 2005, she reflects on the Rivas case. "I never solved it, but I realized solving wasn't the point. Luis was a man who saw the architecture of danger before it collapsed. He didn't run because he was scared. He ran because he understood how short life becomes when you're standing too close to the truth. He didn't disappear, he just stepped out of view." That line stuck with many who followed the case. Because there's something deeply unsettling, yet oddly comforting in the idea that Rivas might still be watching from the edges. That maybe he's not buried in a forgotten grave or lost in a vault of silent bank records. Maybe he's in the room where financial crimes are still quietly planned, in the systems people still trust too much, in the algorithms that watch but don't speak. Maybe he's right there in the ledger, between two decimals that never quite reconcile. The final envelope. In 2022, nearly 30 years after Lewis's disappearance, Natalia received one last envelope. Inside was a photo, grainy but clearly recent. A man in his 60s wearing a fisherman's hat sitting in a cafe in Dubrovnik. Thin, glasses, the same sharp eyes, a slight smile. On the back was written, in slanted Spanish, "Everything balances, eventually. No signature. No return address." Luis Alberto Rivas may never be officially found. He may never be tried, blamed, or exonerated. But his case remains one of the most quietly complex disappearances in South American financial history. And it leaves us with a final question. When a man becomes his own shadow, who's left to cast the light? Story 2. The Forgotten Jewel Heist in Buenos Aires. You've probably never heard of La Casa Altamira. It was a modest, two-story antique showroom on a quiet street in Recoleta, one of Buenos Aires' most refined neighborhoods. From the outside, it didn't look like much. Just a brushed steel door, a discreet bronze plaque, and large tinted windows that glinted faintly in the Argentine sun. The sort of place you walk past without noticing. But on the inside, it held some of the most historically significant and astonishingly valuable jewels ever privately held in Argentina. And in the early hours of June 13, 2002, all of them disappeared. No broken locks, no forced entry, no alarms triggered, no signs of tampering. And no suspects. Just $18.7 million USD worth of historical gems, heirlooms, and royal artifacts vanished. And for 20 years, very few have spoken about it, almost as if it had never happened. The House of Altamira. La Casa Altamira wasn't a bank, and it wasn't a museum. But it operated as something between both a secure estate showcase, meant to house valuable private collections from wealthy families unwilling to entrust them to traditional vaults. Think of it as a Swiss bank with chandeliers and colonial oil paintings. Founded in 1964 by a reclusive shipping magnate named Santiago Altamira, the house had quietly become the final resting place for a curated, rotating collection of Argentine, Spanish, and French heirlooms jewels that once belonged to military generals, early Argentine presidents, and even rumored remnants from Spanish royal courts. Some of the items in the collection included a 17th century ruby-encrusted chalice believed to have belonged to Viceroy Joaquin del Pino, a rare Fabergé pendant gifted to the granddaughter of General José de San Martin, a pair of antique platinum earrings previously listed in Sotheby's catalogs, never sold, and an undocumented cache of gold coins and vintage Swiss watches. Most of these items were never listed in public records. That was the point. The privacy of the elite, sealed in velvet boxes. And that privacy may have been what made it so vulnerable. The morning it was there. It was a Friday morning. The sun was barely up when the manager of Casa Altamira, Lucia Cabrera, arrived to open the building. She keyed in her credentials on the digital panel at 7:06 a.m., just like she had done every weekday for 9 years. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Lucia noticed something immediately. The humidity-controlled glass vault in the center salon, which typically held 6 major display pieces, was empty, completely. Not broken, not tampered with, just clean as if the items had never been there. She rushed to the second floor, the reinforced cabinet holding the coin collection empty. The private storage lockers lining the inner corridor unlocked, but eerily pristine. Nothing else was disturbed, not a desk, not a rug, not a cushion on the armchairs. It was as if someone had walked through the showroom with surgical precision, taken only what mattered, and vanished through a crack in reality. Lucia pressed the silent alarm. Within minutes, the Policia Federal Argentina arrived. But what they found confused them even more. The security that should have worked. Casa Altamira boasted 5 separate layers of security. A digital keypad with biometric verification. Time-locked cabinets with redundant key authorization. Infrared sensors and motion detectors in every display room. A private 24/7 monitoring team in a nearby annex. A backup emergency vault requiring physical retinal scans. None of them were triggered. There were no logs of external access, no alarms, no power failures, no signs of override or hacking. The footage from the security cameras showed nothing between 11:00 p.m. and 6:45 a.m., a blackout window of nearly 8 hours, during which no movement, no shadow, no entry or exit was recorded. Forensic analysis found no fingerprints, no partials, no glove smudges. The floors bore no scuff marks, and none of the cabinet locking mechanisms showed signs of recent use, yet they were empty. The only anomaly: 2 microfibers recovered from the floor of the ruby chalice display, a type of dust-resistant silk used in high-end European transport cases. It was the only piece of physical evidence. Who knew what was inside? Unlike bank vaults, which are often cataloged and insured through international registries, Casa Altamira operated on private discretion. Only a handful of people knew what items were present at any given time. Lucia Cabrera, the day manager. Victor Ferreira, the late-night custodian. Carlos Palenzuela, the retired naval officer who oversaw off-site logistics. And the clients themselves, whose identities were stored in handwritten ledgers kept in a fireproof drawer on the second floor. That ledger was also missing. But here's the twist. The ledger didn't contain full names. It listed clients by their initials and acquisition dates, meaning even if someone had stolen it, they'd have to already know the coded identifiers to match names with valuables. Unless, of course, they had been given the key. The custodian who did show. Victor Ferreira was 67. He'd worked nights at the casa for 15 years. Quiet, punctual, solitary, a man who kept to himself. He was also missing. He had left a voicemail with Lucia at 6:41 a.m., just minutes before she arrived, stating he was not feeling well and had left early. But when police checked his apartment in Balvanera, they found his belongings packed, passport gone, and security badge discarded in the trash. A bolo beyond the lookout was issued. No trace, no travel record, no witnesses. Some said he had family in Portugal. Others claimed he once worked in a naval logistics crew during the Falklands conflict, a job that would have taught him how to move high-value cargo swiftly and silently. If Victor took the jewels, he didn't do it alone. And if he didn't, someone used him as a shadow. The insurance that didn't pay. The elite who stored their heirlooms at Altamira expected discretion, but they also expected protection. Only the insurance firm, an offshore entity registered in Bermuda, had a clause. No payout shall be granted in absence of physical breach or demonstrable external entry. In other words, if the place wasn't broken into, no one gets paid. Nearly $19 million USD gone, no insurance payout, no charges filed, no suspects indicted. The client's wealthy politicians, media moguls, and even 2 members of an aristocratic Spanish family remained silent. Some retracted their claims. Others moved their remaining assets out of the country. Casa Altamira closed its doors quietly in 2003. The building now houses a boutique PR firm. The velvet display cases, long gone. The ledger never recovered. Victor Ferreira never seen again. A crime that forgot itself. Some investigators still look into the case. Occasionally, one of the jewels appears in grainy photos from auctions in Prague, or in black market catalogs that surface briefly before vanishing again. One ring, believed to be part of the San Martin pendant collection, showed up in a photo posted to an anonymous art collector's blog in 2016. The photo was deleted within hours. Interpol has yet to link any one person to the Altamira theft. No international warrant has ever been successfully issued. And maybe that's because the people who committed the crime didn't do it for the money. They may have done it for a client, for history, or simply because they could. So ask yourself, how do you steal millions in silence without ever opening a single lock? Every great heist has its mythology: the rooftop thieves, the tunnel diggers, the acrobat who slipped through lasers. But the Altamira robbery didn't leave a hole in the wall or a trail of broken glass. It left nothing. And for seasoned investigators, nothing is the loudest clue of all. Because someone had to plan it. Someone had to execute it. And someone somewhere now possesses items worth nearly $20 million, yet can't sell them openly, insure them, or even display them. That's the curse of perfect theft. And perhaps that's exactly what they intended. The Phantom Crew hypothesis. In the months following the heist, a quiet profile emerged among Argentine federal investigators, not officially published, but whispered across offices and backroom strategy sessions. They called it the Phantom Crew hypothesis. The idea was simple. This was not the work of a lone janitor or opportunistic burglar. It was an operation. 4 to 6 individuals. 12 to 18 months of planning. Inside access through quiet coercion or well-paid silence. And a client, a buyer, a reason. What made Altamira vulnerable was also what made it appealing: its secrecy. No central registry, no insurance oversight, no international scrutiny. It was a place where history was stored behind glass with few witnesses and fewer records. And that's the kind of place a Phantom Crew dreams about. The dossier that disappeared. Among the few detailed case files created during the investigation, one stood out. It belonged to Detective Hernan Velez, who was part of the Federal Art Crimes Division in Buenos Aires at the time. Velez had built a theory, never made public, that 3 of the stolen pieces, the San Martin pendant, the Del Pino chalice, and the Vega emerald brooch, had already been flagged for illicit interest months before the heist. He had obtained informal correspondence between Altamira's founder, Santiago Altamira, and an international art broker based in Brussels, a man named Bruno Hollander, known for his dealings in the gray market antique scene. In one letter, Hollander writes, "The items you've described are of exceptional legacy value, but they will not be liquid unless a silent buyer is confirmed. Discretion is critical. My contacts in Morocco and St. Petersburg may assist in the transition, should you proceed." This letter was dated October 2001, 8 months before the heist. Detective Velez compiled these documents into a dossier he labeled Technicamente Invisible, technically invisible. 2 weeks after submitting his report to a senior official, he was reassigned to Rural Customs Enforcement in Mendoza. His dossier was never seen again. Santiago Altamira's silence. At the center of all of this was the man who started it, Santiago Altamira. By 2002, he was 78 years old and in poor health. But in his prime, Altamira had been a cunning businessman, with rumored connections to both military procurement contracts and international shipping lanes during the 1970s. He was a ghost in paperwork, listed as consultant in most of his own companies, rarely photographed and never directly quoted. He granted only one interview about the heist in 2004 to a small cultural magazine. When asked if he believed it was an inside job, he replied, If someone opens your safe without leaving a mark, either they know you very well, or you never really owned what was inside. The quote was largely ignored at the time, but some investigators later interpreted it as a cryptic confession not of complicity, but of inevitability, that perhaps Altamira knew the theft would come, that perhaps he even saw it as a form of succession. He died in 2006. His estate went into probate. Many of his offshore holdings dissolved within a year. No beneficiaries were ever publicly listed. Where the jewels went. In 2008, a confidential briefing circulated through Interpol's Art Crimes Unit. It included a list of suspected items currently in private collections in Casablanca, Morocco, St. Petersburg, Russia, Hong Kong, Dubai. 3 of the items were strongly believed to have originated from the Altamira cache, though provenance was unverifiable. A Fabergé pendant matching the San Martin description photographed in a Hong Kong private collector's Instagram post. The image vanished within hours. A ruby goblet with similar dimensions to the Del Pino chalice spotted at a closed-door Russian antiques fair. The seller refused authentication. An emerald brooch listed under a colonial Argentine collection in a discreet Dubai auction catalog circulated privately to royal buyers. Interpol couldn't act. Why? Because the items were never officially declared stolen. There were no serial numbers, no central registry, no fingerprints, just a rumor of origin. That's what made the Altamira robbery so brilliant. The thieves hadn't just stolen objects, they had stolen the right to prove they ever existed. A broker's strange confession. In 2013, a mid-level art broker named Gabriel Esforza was arrested in Valencia for attempting to smuggle an unlisted Flemish painting through customs. During questioning, he spoke off the record about a client he once worked with in Buenos Aires. He didn't mention Altamira by name, but he said this: they wanted objects with no paper trail, not diamonds from stores, not paintings from catalogs, things people would miss but couldn't claim. He described meeting with an older man who handed him a silk glove containing 6 unset stones, sapphires, and rubies, all loose, all cut, no stamps. When asked where they came from, the man had answered, from a room that never existed. Gabriel served only a short sentence. Upon release, he moved to Marrakesh. He has not spoken publicly since. The lady in the archive. There is one last thread in the Altamira mystery. In 2021, a historian cataloging Argentine colonial archives came across a faded ledger from the 1980s, listing security contractors involved in non-governmental artifact housing. One name reappeared several times: M. Reyes, believed to be Maria Reyes, a logistics coordinator with dual Spanish-Argentine citizenship. She had been tied in the late 1990s to 3 discrete transfers of religious artifacts from Spain to South America, one of which allegedly went missing in customs. Reyes was never charged, but in 2002, she had briefly worked for a Buenos Aires consulting firm that provided discreet advisory services to museums and private collectors. That firm, Palenzuela & Co., the same name as Carlos Palenzuela, the logistics officer responsible for Altamira's internal protocols. So the question becomes, was Altamira ever truly robbed, or was it just reclaimed? By 2023, over 2 decades had passed since the velvet-lined displays of Casa Altamira were found empty. And though the building itself now houses a digital marketing firm, the mystery that unfolded within those glass cases still lingers like the faint smell of lacquered wood. Some crimes leave trails, others leave scars. But Altamira left something stranger, a deliberate absence. No arrest, no confessions, no noise. As if the theft had been designed not to shock, but to slip away unnoticed. The man in Madrid. In the spring of 2022, a retired art security consultant named Joaquin Abascal gave a quiet lecture at a private symposium in Madrid. The topic was non-invasive theft strategies in 20th century artifact crimes. About halfway through the talk, he deviated from his notes. "In one of the cleanest cases I ever reviewed," he said, "there was no entry, no exit, no audit trail. The investigators kept looking for broken locks, but the locks were never touched, because the plan wasn't to break in, it was to be let in." After the lecture, a small group of attendees approached him to ask for clarification. He refused to name the case, but one attendee recorded a snippet on their phone. In it, Abascal says, "Altamira was never robbed, it was retired." Retirement as disappearance. This theory that the heist was not a robbery, but a planned erasure gained quiet traction among South American security analysts. In this view, Casa Altamira had become a liability. Its founder aging, with no heir to assume control. Its security protocols growing outdated. Its contents increasingly sought after by international buyers who didn't want headlines, only ownership. In this theory, Altamira's own network decided to liquidate the showroom, not by closing it with fanfare, but by pulling the items from behind the curtain and walking them quietly into private hands. The theft in this reading was not criminal. It was contractual, hidden behind NDAs and offshore accounting tricks, with intermediaries acting as phantoms to preserve plausible deniability for the true recipients. A shadowy form of estate planning, but for things too valuable to be claimed and too dangerous to leave in plain sight. The legacy of loss. Today, you can find snippets about Altamira buried in law enforcement databases, used as a training case for invisible thefts. New officers are taught to review not just alarm logs and physical entry points, but staff movement, client pressure, and legacy vulnerabilities. Interpol quietly lists the case among a dozen non-actionable heritage losses. But what makes the Altamira story haunting is not just that the jewels are missing. It's that their absence was never mourned by their owners. There were no public pleas, no media outcry, no grieving heirs. Only silence, as if those who lost the jewels had already accepted their disappearance, perhaps because they knew it was coming. Perhaps because they had been paid not in restitution, but in relief. The stranger at the archive. In 2023, an archivist named Ana Lucero, working at the National Museum in Rosario, came across a box of unsorted estate documents tied to an unlisted donor. Inside was a small, unlabeled envelope containing a faded black and white photograph. It showed a man, seated beside a woman, on the patio of what appeared to be a hacienda in rural Spain. Behind them, on a small garden table, sat what looked unmistakably like the Vega emerald brooch. On the back of the photo, in blue pen, was written, "For her the last light of Buenos Aires." M.R. The museum didn't list the image. No official record was created, but Ana, curious, ran a soft facial comparison through an internal database. The woman in the photo matched a passport image of Maria Reyes, the logistics contractor suspected of being a silent broker in Altamira's operations. The man, never identified. What they took was more than gold. The Altamira heist wasn't just about objects. It was about removal of history, of evidence, of identity. The jewelry wasn't melted. It was placed, preserved, hidden in places where its meaning would be reinterpreted no longer as Argentine colonial relics, but as anonymous luxury. What vanished was more than wealth. It was narrative. A nation's lost heirlooms now sit behind the glass of drawing rooms, yachts, and private estates, their significance erased, their provenance severed. No one mourns what cannot be proven. No one cries for a theft that no one admits. A final note from Lucia. Years later, Lucia Cabrera, the former manager of Casa Altamira, gave one anonymous interview to a graduate student researching high-profile unsolved thefts. When asked if she believed she'd ever know who took the jewels, she paused, then answered, "No, but sometimes I wonder if they were ever really there to begin with. Maybe that was the trick. Maybe I was working in a dream and one day I simply woke up." When nothing remains. There is a phrase in security circles. The perfect theft is not the one that leaves no trace. It's the one that leaves no memory. Altamira was just such a case. And so we're left with a final question. If no one files a report and no one asks for justice, was it ever truly a crime at all? Story 3. Murder on the Salt Flats, the case of Bolivia's silent witnesses. The Salar de Uyuni is unlike anywhere else on Earth. A vast, otherworldly plain of blinding white salt stretching more than 10,000 square kilometers across southwest Bolivia. It is silent, empty, pure in appearance and unsettling in stillness. Some say it looks like heaven. Others say it feels like purgatory. In March 2011, a group of Belgian eco-tourists chartered a sunrise tour with a local guide. They were supposed to visit Isla Incahuasi, watch the sun rise over the endless plain, and then head back to Uyuni town for lunch. But instead, they found something else. About 12 kilometers off the main tour path, lying half submerged in a saltwater pool, was the body of a man. Face down, arms limp, no shoes, no vehicle in sight. And despite the blistering sun above, the man was ice cold. The victim. His name was Carlos Antizana, a 42-year-old hydrologist who worked with a private mining consultancy out of Potosi. Carlos had been hired to assess the brine density across various regions of the Salt Flats, a routine task, given Bolivia's aggressive push to exploit lithium reserves buried beneath the salt crust. He had gone out alone 2 days earlier in a Toyota Land Cruiser, reportedly to take water samples from low-traffic areas. He never returned. His body was discovered without visible trauma, no blood, no defensive wounds, no signs of dehydration or exposure. His skin showed signs of hypothermia in the middle of the desert. The cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, with environmental stress noted as a contributing factor. But the police report didn't explain why his vehicle was missing, or why his notes, laptop, and water samples had vanished, or why, despite being in the largest salt flat on Earth, there wasn't a single tire track leading to or from his body. The silence of Uyuni. Uyuni is a remote town, small, dusty, built on the bones of a once thriving railway hub. It survives today on tourism, mining contracts, and a tight-knit web of families who have lived there for generations. When Carlos's death made national news, the local police issued a short statement. No signs of foul play. Victim likely succumbed to extreme exposure after vehicle malfunction. But the guides who took tourists across the Salar every day didn't believe it. "There's no way he walked there," said Esteban Poma, a local driver with 12 years of experience. "That spot is too far from the safe paths, too deep. You go there with GPS or not at all." Another guide, Marisol Gutierrez, claimed she had seen Carlos's vehicle parked near Isla Pescado the day before the body was discovered nearly 20 kilometers away from where he was found. The timelines didn't line up. And soon, neither did the politics. The lithium rush. To understand why Carlos's death caused unease, you have to understand what lies beneath the salt. Bolivia's Salar de Uyuni contains the world's largest untapped lithium reserve, a key component in batteries, electric vehicles, and other green technologies. By 2011, international mining interests were circling like vultures. Chinese, Canadian, and German firms had all submitted exploration requests. The Bolivian government, fiercely nationalistic, insisted that any extraction would be state-controlled, but allowed outside advisory consultants to survey the terrain. Carlos Antizana worked for one such firm. His company, GeoGervais Limited, had ties to both Bolivian state officials and a Canadian extraction conglomerate known as Argent Lithium. His work, mapping water saturation beneath the surface crust, essentially identifying the most profitable drilling sites. Privately, some believed Carlos was preparing a report that would determine which company received the first lucrative permit. And then just days before his findings were to be submitted, he was dead. A missing vehicle. 3 weeks after Carlos's death, a shepherd herding llamas near the Chilean border stumbled across an abandoned Toyota Land Cruiser hidden in a low ravine, buried beneath a torn tarp and partially covered with white dust. The vehicle's plates matched Carlos's rental. The tires had been deflated. The dashboard was removed. The onboard GPS had been ripped out and the seats were missing. There were no personal belongings inside, no notebooks, no equipment. But forensic techs found a smear of a foreign lubricant, used primarily in drilling gear, on the inside of the rear doors. No fingerprints, no blood, no DNA. Just an empty vehicle, parked and stripped, quietly erased. The police revised their report. Vehicle likely stolen post-mortem. No evidence of criminal intent. They closed the case, but others kept asking questions. The whistleblower geologist. Later that year, a Bolivian geologist named Hector Melguerjo, who had briefly worked with Carlos, came forward anonymously to local journalists. He claimed Carlos had been pressured to modify his brine density, results specifically to underreport the viability of certain sections of the salt flats near a region called Laguna Celeste. Why? Because those areas had already been privately promised to a foreign investor, despite official statements that no deals had been made. Hector said Carlos had refused. He wanted transparency, scientific accuracy. 2 weeks later, Carlos told Hector in a private email that he was considering quitting the consultancy. That email was dated March 10th. Carlos was found dead March 13th. The data that vanished. To this day, no one has ever recovered Carlos Antizana's final report. GeoGervais Limited claimed that the data was never submitted. His family insisted he backed up his files, but both his laptop and field notes were missing from his recovered vehicle. His cloud storage account was deleted 2 days after his death. No one knows by whom. And though a preliminary report had been sent a week earlier to both the Ministry of Mining and Argent Lithium, it contained only generic measurements, nothing actionable. It was as if the real results had been buried, but not in paper, in salt. So now we ask, was Carlos Antizana the victim of a desert accident, or a man who got too close to the truth, hidden beneath Bolivia's shining white crust? The Salar de Uyuni stretches into a horizon that tricks the eyes. When the air is still, the salt reflects the sky like a mirror, too perfect, too symmetrical. You begin to wonder what's real, what's reflection, and what's missing. By the time Carlos Antizana's body was found, the truth had already begun to disappear. And the deeper people looked into his death, the clearer it became. Someone wanted the facts to vanish into the salt, like footprints erased by wind. But silence isn't always natural. Sometimes it's manufactured. The journalist who refused to let go. In late 2011, an investigative journalist named Beatriz Nolasco began working on a feature for La Razón, one of Bolivia's most prominent newspapers. She had covered lithium politics before, mainly the tug-of-war between state agencies and foreign developers, but this time, she had a name and a body. And she wanted to know why no one seemed to care. Her reporting took her to Uyuni, to Potosi, to the Ministry of Mining offices in La Paz. What she found disturbed her. The consultancy Carlos worked for, GeoGervais Limited, had shut down 3 weeks after his death. Its founders had moved their headquarters to British Columbia, dissolving Bolivian operations with no public explanation. Several former employees had gone silent, unlisted numbers, no social profiles, even personal websites wiped from web archives. Beatriz tried filing Freedom of Information requests, but they stalled. She was told the contracts were under revision. Then her editor received a warning call. A man, voice distorted electronically, told him that Beatriz should reconsider her priorities. She wasn't dissuaded, but within weeks, her article was pulled from publication. And just like that, the only journalist actively working the Carlos Antizana story was off the case. A pattern in the salt. Despite media silence, local whispers continued, especially among the guides, the people who knew the salt flats not as scenery, but as a living, dangerous thing. Several drivers claimed they'd seen lights in restricted zones late at night. Not headlights, but high-mounted rigs, like those used in mineral surveys. Quiet machines, appearing just before dawn, then disappearing behind distant ridges. One man, Raul Mamani, swore he saw a portable drill rig being moved across the Salar in unmarked trucks. But when he tried to get closer, he found the access roads blocked by makeshift fencing guarded by 2 men in civilian clothing. He asked who they were with. They replied simply, "We're here for research." Raul reported the sighting to local police. No one followed up. Ghost permits. In January 2012, a former civil engineer with the Bolivian Ministry of Mining, under the condition of anonymity, shared documents with a human rights group based in Sucre. Among the files was a private letter of intent from the Bolivian government to a shell company registered in Panama, dated March 7, 2011, just 6 days before Carlos died. The company, Saltec Holdings. The area specified, Laguna Celeste Extraction Zone. The letter promised exploratory priority for 18 months and full lithium brine access if results were favorable. But Saltec Holdings wasn't listed in any public lithium development registry. No press release, no environmental assessments, no public comment period. Just a ghost permit, never filed openly, but powerful enough to override local protections. Carlos's field samples, according to those who worked with him, included high-yield lithium density in precisely that area. If his findings had gone public, Saltec's permit would have been worthless. A death without violence. Carlos Antizana died of what the coroner called exposure-induced cardiac arrest. But forensic pathologist Dr. Amanda Cordova, who reviewed the body under contract with the family, noticed subtle anomalies. A faint chemical residue under the fingernails, possibly a desiccant compound used in lab preservation. Bruising around the wrists, consistent with restraints though faint. Early signs of electrolyte imbalance, rare for someone carrying multiple water canisters. More strangely, his eyelids showed microtears suggesting prolonged blinking against artificial light. Dr. Cordova later speculated Carlos may have been interrogated under harsh conditions, exposed to dry air and intense illumination, then placed in the salt flats after his death. But the report was never made public. The family, fearing backlash, declined to pursue legal action. Another closed door, another dead end. The woman in the hotel. A strange postscript emerged years later. In 2015, a Chilean backpacker named Camila Vargas stayed overnight in Uyuni. She checked into a family-run hostel near the center of town. She claimed she was woken around 3:30 a.m. by 2 voices arguing in the courtyard below her room. One male, one female. She looked out the window and saw a woman in hiking gear speaking to a tall man in a gray jacket. The woman seemed furious. Camilla recalled her shouting, "You said he'd be safe. You promised me he'd come back." When the man noticed Camilla watching, he pulled the woman by the arm and disappeared around the corner. Camilla later saw a photo of Carlos Antizana online in a lithium documentary. She told friends, "That man, he looked just like the one in the courtyard." No justice in the white. Today, no formal inquest exists into Carlos's death. His name appears briefly in archived mining reports, listed as a former field consultant. There is no public memorial, no official investigation. His death certificate lists natural causes. And yet questions remain. Why was his data destroyed? Why did his company vanish? Why was a potentially billion-dollar contract signed 6 days before his death? And why has no one seen the real samples he collected? The salt doesn't talk, but it remembers. It holds moisture, it holds minerals, and maybe, just maybe, it holds secrets. So we're left to wonder, what happens when the earth beneath your feet is worth more than your life? There are crimes that end with a name, a conviction, a sentence. And then there are crimes that end in nothing, no paper trail, no witnesses, no closure. Only a faint disturbance in the story, an unfinished sentence. Carlos Antizana's death is one of those. And what makes his case so haunting is not just the silence left in his place, but the quiet machinery that seemed to move just out of reach, churning beneath the surface, like the lithium brines he once studied. The investigation was never reopened. But the story still isn't over. The disappearing trail. In 2017, 6 years after Carlos's body was found, a newly assigned Bolivian government transparency officer, Diego Serrano, attempted to audit historical contracts connected to lithium concessions near Laguna Celeste. His team discovered missing files from March 2011 stored under a redacted project name. Explos C9, Resource Mapping, Sector NZ. One internal memo, partially recovered from a backup archive, mentioned unfavorable density projection. Per CA contradicts Saltec feasibility claim. Recommend removal from scope before Q2 filing. Diego filed a request to access the full project archive. 2 weeks later, he was reassigned to a regional mining inspection post in Oruro. His report was never released. Shortly afterward, all remaining records of Explos C9 were marked inactive, and Saltec Holdings officially ceased Bolivian operations, transferring their stake to a newly formed Argentine holding company registered in the Bahamas. Ownership untraceable. The brothers' silence. Carlos had one sibling, Javier Antizana, a schoolteacher who lived in Sucre. He never gave interviews, never filed complaints, never pushed for answers. But according to close friends, Javier received a private settlement from an undisclosed Canadian firm in 2012 under the vague category of contractor closure indemnity. The amount was never made public. Javier never spoke publicly again. He left teaching in 2014 and reportedly moved to Santa Cruz. A neighbor told a local reporter he had taken up painting, but never left his house. When asked about his brother, Javier once said, "He loved the Salar. I think that's why they put him back there." Lithium and the new silence. Today, Bolivia is one of the world's top holders of lithium reserves. International firms continue to circle, and despite political shifts, the extraction infrastructure is growing slowly, carefully, and always guarded by silence. Some parts of the Salar remain off-limits to the public. They are not marked, they're not fenced, but tour guides avoid them. Locals call them zonas mutas, mute zones. They say you don't bring tourists there. You don't take photos there. And you don't ask why. Satellite imagery has, on occasion, shown strange rectilinear patterns in those regions, subtle grid-like formations just below the salt crust. Drilling paths, perhaps, survey lines, but they are quickly wiped away by wind, sun, and salt. Like so much else in this story. Beatrice's final note. In 2020, journalist Beatrice Nolasco, now working for an environmental NGO, published a blog entry commemorating the 9th anniversary of Carlos's death. It read in part, "I was told to forget, but the sailor never forgets. Every storm reveals tracks. Every drying pool exposes what lies beneath. One day the salt will give him back not his body but his truth." 2 days later, the post was deleted. Her site was taken offline, and her contact information was scrubbed from her organization's website. A salt flat that doesn't forgive. What really happened to Carlos Antizana? Did he threat a powerful mining contract? Did he refuse to falsify data? Or was he simply a man in the wrong place, at the wrong time, holding information someone else needed to disappear? The truth lies somewhere in the dust, perhaps still buried beneath the blinding white crust, perhaps locked in a hard drive that no longer exists. Or perhaps it now lives in the equipment being used to extract billions of dollars in lithium from Bolivian earth. Because every so often a battery is built, a car is charged, a contract is signed, and deep in the chain of production, there's a moment when someone benefits from Carlos Antizana no longer being here. And that, more than anything, is the true mark of this crime. Not blood, but profit. So in the end, we ask, when you stand on ground that remembers everything, how long can a secret stay buried? Story 4. How a llama was framed for theft in Peru. It started with a photograph. A fuzzy, low-resolution security still taken at 3:47 a.m. on March 12, 2018, in the back alley behind a small regional bank in the Peruvian town of Cholhuahuacho, high in the Apurimac Mountains. In the grainy image, barely visible beneath a pool of harsh fluorescent light, stands a llama, motionless, staring directly at the lens. Behind it, the bank's rear door is cracked open. Inside, investigators later confirmed, the overnight vault had been emptied of nearly 84,000 souls in small denomination, coins mostly from a local mining co-op's payroll fund. The coins were heavy, too heavy for one person to carry, and there were no human figures in the footage. Only the llama. And for some, that was enough. The town needed someone or something to blame. A town suspended in the mountains. Cholhuahuacho is not the kind of place that usually appears on maps outside of Peru. At 3,700 meters above sea level, it sits surrounded by sharp valleys, unpaved switchback roads, and the hum of mining activity just over the hills. Its population hovers around 10,000 mostly Quechua-speaking farmers and laborers. The town had grown quickly in the 2010s thanks to the sprawling Las Bambas copper mine nearby. Jobs increased, infrastructure followed, but so did tension. As the economy shifted from subsistence to extraction, not everyone was happy. Protests became common, water disputes flared, and trust especially toward outsiders eroded. So when the local Banco rural branch was robbed, the town didn't just lose money. It lost face. And in places like this, face matters more than facts. The break-in that made no sound. The robbery was discovered at 6:12 a.m. when the morning security guard, Luis Vieira, arrived to open the bank. He found the rear service door ajar. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed at first. Desks were untouched, cameras still blinked quietly, no broken windows, no forced locks. But in the vault, the damage was clear. 3 canvas sacks of coins, each weighing approximately 30 kilograms, were gone. Only faint drag marks remained on the floor. The CCTV hard drive had been wiped sometime between 3:30 and 3:50 a.m. All that remained was one single still image autosaved to the cloud. A lone llama standing at the edge of the light, looking like it had seen something or someone. And behind it, nothing but absence. The llama theory. The image went viral, at least locally. El Ladrón de Cuatro Patas, the headlines read, "The Four-Legged Thief." Theories exploded. Some believed the llama had been trained a smuggler's pack animal, used to haul coins through the alleys. Others insisted it was a distraction released to walk into frame, while the real culprits escaped unseen. More dramatically, some townspeople whispered that the llama was cursed, that it had been used in a forgotten form of Andean ritual theft, guided by Brujeria mountain witchcraft tied to revenge and silence. All that sound fantastical, but no suspects were ever identified, no witnesses came forward. And strangely, the animal was never found. No matching llama was located in town or surrounding districts. No tags, no farm claimed it. Not even the local livestock registry had a match. It was as if the creature had appeared for the job and disappeared back into myth. Enter Inspector Reynaldo Huarquea. 2 days after the theft, Inspector Reynaldo Huarquea was flown in from Abanque, the capital of the Apurimac region. Huarquea was not a typical investigator. Soft-spoken, bookish, and known for his fondness for ethnography and indigenous folklore, he had handled several unusual cases, including one involving smuggled Inca artifacts and a charlatan healer who was using mercury in ritual drinks. His first act was to dismiss the llama theory entirely. Animals don't commit robberies, he said, but sometimes they're used to mask them. Instead, he focused on the human angle. And almost immediately, things began to unravel. The vanishing guard shift. Bank records showed the overnight guard on duty that night was Andres Salcido, a part-time contractor hired only 2 weeks earlier. He had clocked in at 10:00 p.m., confirmed by digital log. But at 3:20 a.m., his entry swipe registered an exit. There was no exit footage, no alarm, just a logged door use and then silence. Andres never returned. His address, a rented room above a mechanic's shop, was found vacant the next day. His employer hadn't verified his previous job history. The ID he used, vague. The National Registry had no matching citizen. A ghost. Where the coins went. One of Huarquea's first breakthroughs came not from fingerprints, but from foot traffic. An alley 2 blocks east of the bank had been recently swept, yet locals reported seeing circular indentations on the dirt path the morning after the robbery. Impressions consistent with large cloth sacks being dragged. The trail ended near an abandoned stone shed on the outskirts of town. Inside, investigators found one torn coin sack and a single wool fiber matching the fur of a llama or alpaca. Nearby, fresh tire tracks leading to a narrow service road that connects to the main highway, the same road used by private mine shuttles and logistics trucks. The tracks were never matched to any registered vehicle. A town that wouldn't speak. Despite Huarquea's efforts, the investigation stalled. Too many things didn't line up. A temporary guard who didn't exist. A llama with no owner. A town full of cameras and no footage. A robbery that removed nearly 100 kilograms of coinage without noise or resistance. Locals grew quiet. Some said they believed the theft had been arranged by outsiders. Others believed it had been allowed a warning to the bank or to the mine. Huarquea began to suspect something deeper, that the robbery wasn't about the money at all. That it had been staged. But if so, for what? And who benefits from disappearing 84,000 souls in coins? There's one more thing. A week after the case went cold, a note was slipped under the police station door. Handwritten, no signature, only one sentence. Don't chase shadows. Sometimes the mountain hides what it protects. And taped to the note was a single llama hair. So we ask, what if the point of the crime wasn't what was stolen, but what it was meant to distract us from? By the end of the second week, the buzz around the so-called llama robbery had already started to fade from the regional news cycle. What lingered was something harder to trace, not gossip, not folklore, but a quiet discomfort. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the silence that followed. Inspector Reynaldo Huarquea, still in town and working alone by this point, had a theory he couldn't shake. No one hides this wealth unless they had permission to hide. In his mind, the llama, the fake security guard, and the missing coins were not the mystery, they were the noise, the decoy. The real mystery was what no one would talk about, and what might have been moved through town at the exact moment everyone was watching the bank. The false trail. As Huarquea rewalked the routes near the Banco Rural, he started noticing something odd. In the week following the robbery, several crates had arrived by cargo truck, unloaded quietly behind the Municipal Administrative Office, a government building, not typically used for logistics or storage. According to shipping manifests, the crates were marked school renovation materials. Except there were no active school projects in March 2018, and when he asked the local education board, they hadn't requested or received any new materials. The listed sender, a logistics company based in Arequipa called Transandes SRL. He checked the registration. It had been dissolved 2 months earlier. The crates were already gone. A different kind of theft. The theory began to shift. What if the coins were never meant to leave town? What if they were just a decoy operation, designed to keep attention on the bank, while another transaction passed through unobserved? Huarquea's suspicions centered on a narrow corridor of economic activity between Chalhuahuacha and Las Bambas mine, one used heavily for hauling equipment, fuel, and copper concentrate. It was a zone under constant negotiation between mining officials, state actors, and local protest leaders. Over the years, deals had been made in the open. Others, it was said, were made in the back of trucks, in unregistered payments, sometimes in currency that wasn't tracked. What if someone had used the idea of a crime to hide the movement of something else entirely? Who was Andres Salcido? The fake security guard, Salcido, remained the investigation's most compelling thread. Through handwriting analysis on his application form and voice comparisons from the bank's archived phone logs, Huarquea believed the man's real name was Victor Condori, a seasonal worker from a nearby village. Condori had a criminal record, a minor arrest in 2013 for trespassing during a mining protest. No convictions. But here's what was strange. 3 weeks before the robbery, Condori had made 2 unexplained visits to a government outpost near the Las Bambas administrative camp, a place unrelated to his work history. No appointment records, no listed purpose. His phone pinged off a nearby tower at 10:43 p.m. on the night of the robbery, but never again. He vanished into the mountains. Locals refused to speak about him. The return of the coins. On April 22, more than a month after the bank heist, a local man was walking along a streambed about 8 kilometers south of Chalhuahuacho when he noticed a plastic drum, the kind used to transport agricultural chemicals, wedged between some rocks. Inside, nearly 15,000 sols in coins, sealed in canvas bags marked with Banco Rural's logo. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no note. They had been hidden, not smuggled. The rest of the money, over 65,000 sols, was never recovered. The theory that got Huarquea transferred. Inspector Huarquea's final report, submitted internally but never made public, laid out a bold conclusion. He believed the bank theft had been a staged event, orchestrated to distract regional authorities and media coverage during a high-risk transfer of illicit materials, possibly unregulated ore, smuggled mining components, or even contraband fuel cells used for unauthorized drilling. According to his notes, the crates moved through the municipal building the same night as the robbery were never meant to stay. They were loaded back onto a different truck just before dawn and driven east, toward a secondary road network known for bypassing customs checks. Why the Llama? Possibly a decoy trained or pushed into the camera's field to ensure there was something bizarre for people to fixate on. And the missing security guard. A burner identity used once, then discarded. The aftermath. 2 weeks after submitting his report, Hugh Archaea was reassigned to a non-investigative administrative role in Cusco. No follow-up inquiries were made. No arrests were pursued. And within 3 months, the case was marked, resolved due to asset recovery. Partial restitution deemed sufficient, further inquiry unnecessary. The town returned to normal. Except, of course, it hadn't. One more Llama. A year later, during a town parade celebrating Chalhuahuacho's founding anniversary, a llama was brought in from a nearby community to participate in the procession. It wore a sash that read, El más famoso del pueblo, the most famous of the town. Everyone laughed, but the animal's markings, particularly the distinctive white ring around its left eye, closely matched those from the security footage. When a journalist from a regional radio station asked the handler where the llama had come from, he shrugged. No lo sé, estaba aquí una mañana, si cuido. I don't know, it showed up one morning, it stayed. The llama still lives near the edge of town. Untouched, unclaimed. So the question remains, was the llama framed? Or was it the only one who ever saw what really happened? Some crimes happen in broad daylight. Others happen in the kind of silence only found at altitude where the sky hangs closer than sound, and the ground is dry enough to swallow secrets whole. What happened in Chalhuahuacho on that cool March night in 2018 was never really solved. Because maybe it wasn't meant to be. Because maybe there was nothing to solve. Only a performance. The Ghost Network. In the months following his quiet reassignment, former Inspector Reynaldo Hugh Archaea did not let the case go. Unofficially and without support, he began tracking unexplained logistics movements across the Apurimac region. He noted an emerging pattern: unregistered cargo transfers, dummy companies appearing in shipping logs, and ghost shipments that bypassed tax checkpoints with special clearance. He traced one route, used frequently at night, that originated from just outside Chalhuahuacho. It fed into a mining corridor but included a detour to an unmarked facility near the town of Cotabambas. That facility, listed as a storage annex, had no signage, no license, no public record. But from satellite images he could see something else: trucks entering in the middle of the night, empty, leaving just before sunrise, covered. The type of route used to transport something valuable or something unlawful. The coins were never the goal. Everything in the original bank theft pointed to precision. An inside man who vanished before sunrise. Clean access to vault-level security. A coin-only theft, heavy, inefficient, and noticeably inconvenient. The stolen money wasn't in bills. It wasn't clean cash. It wasn't easy to spend. Hugh Archaea believed that was the point. Because if you steal something clumsy and obvious, coins in large sacks, the investigation follows the clumsiness, the weight, the animal in the photo, the oddness. And while the town was busy laughing about a llama on security tape, no one was looking at the supply road out of town. The heist was theater, and the llama, A prep, a quiet reappearance. In 2019, an agricultural co-op just north of Cusco reported a sudden increase in coin circulation. Nothing illegal, just odd. Hundreds of 1 sol and 2 sol coins, worn down but clean, suddenly flowed into the local economy through bulk purchases and fuel payments. When the coins were traced informally through serial data, many matched the missing lot from Chalhuahuacho. No charges were filed, no investigation followed. The assumption was someone had hidden them locally, waited until the noise had died down, and slowly laundered them back into the economy. But who? And for what? The man with no name. To this day, Andres Salcido, the fake security guard, has never been located. No family has claimed him. No face has matched his ID. One local woman, a retired schoolteacher, claimed she remembered a man who might have been him, someone who attended a town hall meeting months before the robbery, asking about road closures during a mining protest. She said he didn't speak like a local. His Quechua was stilted. His Spanish was too polished. She remembered his boots were clean. Too clean, she said, like someone who dressed like us but wasn't us. The Llama never left. Years later, the llama that became infamous as El Ladrón de Cuatro Patas still lives near the outskirts of town. It's now somewhat of a local mascot, a legend among children, a curiosity for passing tourists, and a silent fixture at community festivals. No one ever found who owned it. It simply appeared, stayed, and perhaps that's what makes the story so unnerving. Because whether you believe the animal was a tool, a distraction, or simply a curious bystander, the result is the same. It became the face of a robbery that was never really about robbery. It became a shield, a story, a perfect alibi for those who understood that sometimes it's not what people believe that matters, it's what they stop questioning. Inspector Hugh Arquea's last words. Before retiring in 2021, Hugh Arquea was asked in an off-the-record interview what still haunted him about the llama case. He said, "The animal didn't lie, it was there, watching. That's why it unnerved people. Because deep down, everyone in town knew the real thieves weren't wearing masks or gloves. They wore suits, they had papers, they had permits, and they walked in daylight. The llama just had the bad luck to show up on the wrong night, and now it carries the memory for all of us. A theft with no thieves. The Chalhuahuacho case remains officially closed. No suspects, no prosecutions, no resolution. The money partially recovered, the rest dissolved into circulation. The real cargo that may have passed through that night. Unknown, unacknowledged, forgotten on purpose. What remains is a photo, a story, a quiet mountain town that laughs when you ask about the robbery and then quickly changes the subject. So the question that lingers years later is this: what do you do when the only honest witness can't speak? Story 5. The cold storage conspiracy, smuggling through Chile's ports. In the quiet coastal city of Puerto San Vicente, Chile, the harbor doesn't make headlines. Located some 90 kilometers south of Valparaiso, it's a mid-sized port known mostly for cold chain logistics, frozen fish, pharmaceuticals, and meat exports. It runs on efficiency, on temperature control, on routine. But in early October 2015, a simple anomaly disrupted that routine. A refrigerated shipping container, scheduled for routine offloading, arrived from Guayaquil, Ecuador, slightly off manifest, just 62 kilograms overweight. Barely noticeable, a clerical rounding error perhaps, but the customs officer, a meticulous woman named Veronica Tejada, flagged it. She had seen errors before. But this one wasn't a mistake. It was a signal. And behind it lay one of the most well-hidden smuggling operations in modern Chilean history, buried not in sand or tunnels, but in the cold silence of a shipping manifest. A box that shouldn't have been there. The container in question was labeled PCX 906473AQ, a refrigerated unit carrying vacuum-sealed boxes of frozen hake and octopus. Standard load, standard seal. The ship's records indicated it had passed through routine customs in Ecuador, and again in international waters. But when it arrived in San Vicente, something was off. The listed weight, 12,472 kg. The actual weight, 12,534 kg. A difference of 62 kilograms. Still within the margin of paperwork error, but Veronica didn't think so. She requested an immediate secondary inspection. What they found: the sealed cartons at the front of the container matched manifest labels. But behind them, stacked behind a false wall carefully sealed with temperature-appropriate adhesive and hidden from thermal scans, was a metal crate about the size of a large suitcase. It had no markings. Inside, authorities found 3 tightly wrapped bricks of compressed material, later confirmed to be dimethyltryptamine, DMT, a powerful hallucinogen. Several packets of unregistered pharmaceuticals with Cyrillic markings. And most curiously, a sealed USB stick frozen inside a block of dry ice. No fingerprints, no external markings, nothing to trace. The freeze code. What made the discovery stranger was the drive. Once thawed and accessed in a forensic lab, the USB contained only one file, a compressed archive, with a single encrypted spreadsheet titled Temps003X. It required a decryption key, which investigators didn't have. But metadata revealed it had been last edited just 3 days earlier, from a server located in Rotterdam, Netherlands. No connection to the shipping origin in Ecuador. No connection to Chile. The investigators were now dealing with something far more complex than a mislabeled seafood order. A pattern begins to emerge. Veronica Tejada, increasingly concerned, began cross-referencing container logs from the past 2 years. She was looking for refrigerated containers with slight weight irregularities, cargo entries logged from Ecuador, Panama, or Colombia, with destination stops in mid-tier Chilean ports, not Valparaiso or Antofagasta. Secondary inspection refusals. Any sign of data, anomalies in digital manifests. What she found startled her. Between February 2014 and September 2015, 27 separate containers had similar irregularities. Each one passed quietly through customs, never flagged. Each was handled by a different third-party logistics contractor, none of which remained in operation for more than 9 months. And in all cases, the receiving address in Chile traced back to non-existent warehouses or temporary leaseholds, closed within days of delivery. It was a smuggling ring, not based on brute force or volume, but on mathematical invisibility. The cold chain as a shield. The brilliance of the operation lay in its environment. Cold storage shipping relies on extremely tight temperature and timing controls. Delays can destroy an entire load, which means customs rarely interfere. The assumption is, if it's frozen, it's fragile and not worth disrupting. The criminals knew this. By hiding materials inside legitimate cold cargo, they exploited the urgency and fragility of the system. Even if flagged, inspectors would often wave through cold containers to avoid liability for spoilage. But now, with a pattern in hand, Veronica needed to convince someone to listen. That would prove harder than expected. The sudden silence. 2 days after submitting her preliminary findings to her regional director, Veronica's clearance to access shipping manifests was suspended. She was told it was a routine review. Her access was never reinstated. When she pushed back, She was offered a transfer to Punta Arenas, the southernmost, coldest port in the country. She declined. 2 weeks later, she quietly resigned, but not before copying all of her files, including the encrypted spreadsheet. The map that wasn't a map. Independent analysts later examined the decrypted version of Temps 003X. It wasn't a shipping log. It was a timing grid. Each row represented a date, a temperature, and a shipping route. The grid highlighted thermal stability across cold containers. But then a deeper pattern emerged. Every third route included a deviation, a 6-hour window, where the container's temperature was deliberately altered and then restabilized. That fluctuation, according to a physicist consulted by investigators, would allow frozen compartments to be opened, adjusted, and resealed without detection by thermal scans. The containers were being briefly accessed in transit, adjusted at sea, and resealed before arriving at port. It was cold smuggling, hidden by refrigeration data. And the USB. It was a schedule, a blueprint, a clock. So now we ask, how do you stop a crime when the evidence is frozen, timed to vanish, and moves through legitimate systems? By late 2015, the container labeled PCX906473AQ had disappeared from headlines, quietly dismissed as an isolated manifest discrepancy. But for those who knew what was found inside the hallucinogens, the counterfeit pharmaceuticals, and the frozen, encrypted drive, there was no forgetting it. Especially not Veronica Tejada, who had already left her post, but not the mystery. She wasn't alone. A small, underfunded division of Chile's Servicio Nacional de Aduanas, National Customs Service, based in Valparaiso, had taken a quiet interest in her findings. Led by a methodical systems analyst named Miguel Rojas, the team began its own review of cold chain records. But the deeper they looked, the more things began to disappear. A database that cleaned itself. On December 6, 2015, Miguel logged into the National Shipping Registry's secure interface and requested access to archived data from 2013-2015 related to temperature-controlled cargo arrivals. The request failed. Error message, record batch not found. He tried again using alternate ports: Iquique, Antofagasta, Coquimbo, same result. But here, what raised alarms? When he requested non-refrigerated cargo manifests from the same years, the data was intact. Only cold chain shipments between 2013 and 2015 had been wiped specifically from mid-tier ports, many of which had been privatized under various logistics contractors during those years. There was no breach reported, no archive trail, no backup logs. The records were gone, not hacked but deleted internally. A global quiet. Miguel shared his findings with a counterpart in Argentina's Dirección General de Aduanas, hopping for cross-border manifest data. What he got was a polite brush-off. Then, days later, a diplomatic request came from Santiago asking why a low-level Chilean analyst was initiating unsanctioned international queries. His supervisor was reprimanded. Miguel was removed from the inquiry. Unofficially, he told Veronica that someone at a higher level didn't want the records connected. He believed the cold chain anomaly wasn't just a Chilean problem. It was international. The cargo nobody claimed. In early 2016, port workers in Talcahuano, another Chilean port city, noticed an unusual container left idle for over a week in a private storage yard. It was marked for cold chain transfer but had been disconnected from power, risking cargo spoilage. The container had no recipient. Its label had been scratched off and reprinted, sloppy. Authorities opened it. Inside, rotten fish, sealed in branded Ecuadorian export boxes. A false panel. Behind it, medical-grade vials with no labels, some shattered from defrosting. A notebook in Russian, with dosage tables and shipping codes. There were also remnants of vacuum-sealed clothing items, suspected to contain trace narcotics. The container had been abandoned, but the seal number matched a shipment logged weeks earlier at a completely different port. The logistics company, no longer in business. The receiver, a company in Santiago that had shut down 8 days before the container arrived. Who sent it? Unknown. Who picked it up? No one. The shadow company Loop. Veronica, now working freelance for a small anti-corruption NGO, partnered with Miguel to dig further. They uncovered a cycle of shell companies that mirrored each other in behavior. Each operated for 14 months. Each processed only cold cargo. Each was registered using proxy agents or non-existent identities. Each dissolved just after receiving a suspicious shipment. But here's the pattern that mattered most. Every company had processed containers that were slightly overweight, and most shared the same refrigeration unit providers. Not customs, not logistics, refrigeration. That's when the pair realized the smuggling ring wasn't using shippers or dock workers. They were using the refrigeration maintenance layer, the least regulated part of the entire chain. If you controlled who installed or maintained the cooling units, you could build access doors, embed smart temperature fluctuations, and receive the key schedule through things as simple as encrypted drives. No one ever inspects the people who keep things cold. A murder that wasn't a murder. In July 2016, Tomás Aguirre, a refrigeration technician contracted at San Vicente Port, was found dead in his apartment. His death was ruled accidental, a carbon monoxide leak from a faulty portable heater. But his coworker told a different story. 2 days prior, Tomás had confided that he was being followed, and that someone had offered him $6,000 in cash to ignore a modification to a unit on a container bound for Equip. He had refused. His death was never investigated further. Veronica quietly documented it in her private files. The final shipment. By late 2016, the pattern abruptly stopped. The last suspicious container arrived in San Antonio, Chile's busiest port, and was delivered without delay to a cargo yard, where it was promptly redirected to a warehouse on the outskirts of Santiago. The warehouse burned down 3 days later in what was described as an electrical fire. No injuries, no arrests, no contents recovered. It marked the end of the shipments, or at least of the ones that could still be traced. So now we ask, how do you uncover a criminal operation that disappears on schedule, inside something designed to preserve everything except the truth? Most crimes leave a trace, a witness, a receipt, a call. But this one left only a gap in the data. A missing degree, a slightly shifted timestamp, a refrigerated silence. The story of the cold storage conspiracy is not just one of drugs or smuggled vials. It's about how trust in infrastructure ports, containers, refrigeration units becomes the hiding place. The woman with the drive. In early 2017, Veronica Tejada, living in Santiago under a new name and working with an international maritime corruption task force, handed over the decrypted USB drive to a contact within Interpol's Oceanic Cargo Division. He was cautious. He had seen variations of this before, but never so refined, so silent, never something that disappeared itself. When the encrypted spreadsheet was examined again using newer forensic tools, it revealed a second sheet, hidden behind a password-protected macro. That file wasn't a schedule. It was a ledger. Names, dates, heat signatures, dollar amounts, coordinating terminals, a kind of temperature-bracketed payment trail built entirely on container ID numbers and cold chain variance data. There were 38 shipments listed. 17 had been traced to South America, 9 to West African ports, 12 to Rotterdam and Antwerp. The entire thing, it seemed, was global and precise to the decimal. One cell in the sheet simply read, if temp -16, 1 degrees C, abort pickup. Not for the cargo's sake, but for the operation. Why the cold was the perfect crime. The brilliance of the method became clear. Insert contraband into the container during a pre-approved window at a port or at sea. Modify temperature controls through firmware injected by complicit refrigeration techs. Track time and temp to predict exact offload timing. If compromised, temperature irregularity or inspection risk. The cargo spoiled and the evidence destroyed itself. No stings, no storage units, no guards. Just cold. The offshore refrigeration company. The investigation led to a little-known refrigeration manufacturer based nominally in Panama, operating under the name Polarson Systems S.A. No employees. No listed executives. Only a single registered agent traced to a law firm specializing in offshore incorporations. Polarson's firmware was used in dozens of ports globally, embedded in smart reefer retrofits that were sold as upgrades to old refrigerated containers. They claimed to lower energy costs. What they actually did was provide remote access to cooling units, data logging manipulation, timer-based override sequences. Interpol quietly moved to ban the retrofits, but the company dissolved overnight. Website gone, agents unreachable, servers wiped. No legal action was ever taken. Miguel Rojas disappears. In 2018, Miguel, the quiet customs analyst who first traced the deletion of records, left his apartment and never returned. No note. His phone was left on his desk, his laptop wiped. His last known login was to a secure terminal, where he attempted to cross-check container seal code inconsistencies across 4 countries. The login was cut short. That terminal was later found to have had its access logs purged. His body was never found. Authorities list him as missing. The ports are quiet again. Today, refrigerated shipments continue to move quietly through Chile's ports. But something has changed. More inspections, more software restrictions, more eyes. Yet the infrastructure still trusts the cold. The machines, the logs, the mathematics of preservation. And no arrests were ever made, because no one could prove anything. Without records, without a chain of custody, without a warm body to blame, the network collapsed before anyone could pull it apart. Or maybe it just changed shape, moved to new harbors, new firmware, new hands, because silence is the most exportable product of all. Epilogue: a drive in the ice. Interpol kept the USB. It sits or sat in an evidence vault in Lyon, France, inside a sealed container at sub-zero temperature to maintain data integrity. But when it was checked again in 2021, the file structure had changed. A new folder had appeared. Its name, -18 or nothing. The contents were encrypted. Access failed. Attempts to copy the file caused the storage unit to freeze the directory structure, locking out any further access. It was a message, a threat, or maybe just a reminder that even frozen things know when they're being thawed. So we end with this question. What if the next global smuggling empire isn't hiding in tunnels or planes or suitcases, but inside the most trusted technology of our food and medicine? What if cold is the new camouflage? Story 6. The orphan ledger fraud, fire, and a bookkeeper's vanishing in rural Paraguay. In the small Paraguayan town of La Capilla, located just east of the Paraná River and surrounded by soy fields and rust-colored roads, not much changed from year to year. The town's economy was modest: some livestock, some produce, a scattering of light manufacturing tied to the soy trade. But in the spring of 2014, the local cooperative bank, Banco Agricola Rural, posted an unusual profit notice: a 213% revenue increase. This was unexpected. No new businesses had opened. No foreign investment had been announced. No large government contracts had reached the town. So where was the money coming from? The answer was a bookkeeper, a quiet, reserved man named Alvaro Nunez, who had worked at the cooperative for nearly 9 years. He lived alone, walked to work, never traveled. And he would vanish without a trace 6 months later, leaving behind a burnt office, a missing ledger, and a community unsure if it had been robbed or used. The ledger that didn't match the database. In late 2013, Banco Agricola Rural switched from paper-based ledgers to a cloud-based accounting system. During the audit migration, Alvaro insisted on manually entering each historical transaction into the new system. No imports, no automation. It seemed noble, thorough, but according to the data logs, he made over 6,000 edits in a 2-week span, most during non-business hours. When a new accountant was hired in early 2014 to support growth, she noticed strange irregularities. Client accounts with suspiciously precise balances, always ending in .00. Transfers labeled Rural Loan Forgiveness, though the program had ended 3 years prior. Dozens of new accounts listed under one post office box on the outskirts of town. She brought it to Alvaro's attention. He told her the bank was assisting low-literacy clients and managing their accounts in trust. He called them orphan ledgers. Who were the clients? When pressed, Alvaro produced handwritten permission slips signed by dozens of individuals authorizing the bank to manage their finances. The names included dead farmers, missing pensioners, one man who had reportedly been deported 5 years prior. And in several cases, the same signature appeared on multiple slips. The slips were never verified, and the bank's president, Senor Emilio Duarte, dismissed concerns. He said Alvaro was a guardian of forgotten money. But behind closed doors, Duarte had increased his personal salary by 600% since the profits began. When government inspectors arrived in May 2014 for a routine audit, they found nothing unusual because by then, the paper records had all been digitized and verified. All that is, except for one handwritten ledger, Alvaro's private accounting book. It was kept in a locked drawer, and it would be the last thing ever seen inside the bank before the fire. The fire in the filing room. On the night of August 3, 2014, an electrical fire broke out in the back office of Banco Agricola Rural. The flames consumed a single room, the one containing all physical archives, servers, and backups. The rest of the building remained untouched. When firefighters arrived, the fire had already burned itself out. Investigators noted the oddity of no tripped breakers, no fire suppression activation, and the server unit's internal power supply missing. Among the ashes, nothing of Alvaro's handwritten ledger remained. And Alvaro, gone. His small home was abandoned, rent unpaid, food still in the fridge, no signs of struggle. Only a key to his office drawer left on the table. A village under suspicion. Within weeks, rumors spread that Alvaro had run off with millions, that he'd been silenced for discovering fraud, that the bank was a front for money laundering tied to soy export cartels. Local authorities remained quiet. The cooperative board insisted all finances were now digital, audited, and transparent. But when the National Tax Agency attempted to audit the bank again in October, they were told the bank had moved its accounting offshore to improve efficiency. No records were shared. No further investigation was opened. And the townspeople, they started withdrawing money, quietly daily in small amounts. Within 6 months, over 80% of the bank's deposits had been removed. By the end of 2015, Banco Agricola Rural closed its doors temporarily. It has never reopened. The missing watchman. A final wrinkle came in the form of Benjamin Ledesma, the elderly night watchman on duty during the fire. He was interviewed once in passing. He claimed he had been asleep on duty and didn't see anything. But when questioned weeks later by a journalist, he recanted. "No, I saw someone leave that night, wearing Alvaro's coat, but it was too tall. The man was too tall to be Alvaro, and he didn't walk with a limp like Alvaro." Benjamin died of a stroke less than a month later. No further testimony was recorded. So now we're left with this. Was Alvaro Núñez a criminal hiding behind paperwork, or a whistleblower erased by the very records he tried to preserve? And who, if anyone, still holds the orphaned ledger? When the fire consumed Banco Agricola Rural's filing room in August 2014, the official narrative was clear. A tragic accident that destroyed historical financial records, no foul play suspected. But that narrative began to unravel quietly, not because of what burned, but because of what didn't. While the server and archive room was reduced to scorched rubble, a single metal safety deposit drawer was found intact, buried beneath a collapsed cabinet. Inside were 5 items. A leather-bound address book, empty except for a single name. A hotel keycard for a guest house in Ciudad del Este. A pair of reading glasses. A USB flash drive with no label. And a handwritten receipt for printing services, dated 2 days before the fire. The name in the address book: Martin Duarte, the son of the bank's president. The hotel room that spoke volumes: Ciudad del Este, 3 hours northeast of La Capilla, is Paraguay's second largest city and a known hub for contraband trade across the Brazil-Argentina border triangle. The guest house tied to the keycard had no official record of anyone named Núñez staying there. But when an independent journalist used the card to access room 5B, what they found told a different story. The room had been stripped except for a trash bin containing shredded printouts of bank statements, a menu written in German with numbers scrawled across it, a post-it note with what appeared to be account credentials. The USB, once decrypted, contained PDF scans of handwritten pages that matched previous entries known from Alvaro's ledger. Each one included a fictitious account name, a balance, a rotation date, and in some cases a final word, liquidado settled. Rough translation: accounts closed, but for who? And by whom? The orphaned accounts reappear. By early 2015, the Rural Tax Office in Encarnacion flagged a strange pattern. Dozens of small landowners from La Capilla had suddenly begun paying back taxes in full. Many hadn't made payments in years. Some were dead. Others denied any knowledge of having accounts at all. When contacted, one elderly widow, Doña Petrona Medina, provided a letter she had received in the mail. Typed anonymous, it said, "Your account was handled with care. Your husband's contribution has now been returned. No further action required." Enclosed was a cashier's check bearing the seal of a bank in Panama. She cashed it, the money cleared. No fraud alert was ever triggered. Who benefited from the disappearance? While local gossip painted Alvaro Nunez as either a thief or a martyr, someone was clearly benefiting from the chaos. A brief audit of Emilio Duarte, the bank president, revealed a new ranch property purchased in Chaco Boreal, valued at over $800,000. Frequent flights to Sao Paulo and Bogota. An offshore trust opened under the name Fundación de Cosecha, Harvest Foundation. But no charges were ever filed. In fact, in 2016, Duarte was appointed to a government advisory committee on rural finance. He retired 2 years later, never questioned by authorities. And his son, Martin, the name in Alvaro's address book. He had vanished too. Rumors placed him in Germany, others in Uruguay. No official record since 2015. The quiet woman in accounts payable. During this time, a minor figure at the bank began receiving threats. Leticia Frias, a woman who handled document scanning during the digitization process. She told police someone had followed her home from the grocery store, twice. She left town a week later, after a break-in at her home. The only thing stolen, her laptop. Nothing else was touched. Before leaving, she left a note with a friend which would later reach journalists. It read, "I don't think Alvaro ran. I think he settled things his own way. He was obsessed with justice, but not the kind you call police for. The kind you balance like numbers. When he saw too many debts unpaid, I think he collected and closed the book." The bank that operated from the grave. Incredibly, long after its physical doors closed, Banco Agricola Rural continued to process automated debits and loan repayments for nearly 18 months. Digital only. Customer service lines were rerouted to a call center in Asuncion. Clients reported receiving text confirmations, balance statements, and even loan offers as if the bank were still alive. But when the central bank finally demanded full recertification in 2017, everything stopped. Phones disconnected, website down, servers offline. The final digital audit found all customer records wiped, with only a single message left in the database logs. Contabilidad terminada. Accounting concluded. So now we ask, did Alvaro Nunez fake his own disappearance to expose a deeper fraud? Or was he a scapegoat used by others to launder stolen public funds through rural accounts no one would miss? And more curiously, if the accounts were closed, where did the money go? By 2018, the name Alvaro Nunez had nearly vanished from Paraguay's financial records. No government bulletin, no police circular, no death certificate. But rumors persisted. A man matching his description, balding, soft-spoken, limping slightly on his right leg, had been seen boarding a bus from Posadas to Resistencia under the name Oscar Rivas. Another claimed he'd resurfaced in Montevideo, working under an alias as a night auditor at a riverfront hotel. But none of these sightings were ever verified. Because for every trace of Alvaro that appeared, another one vanished. Deleted bank records, redirected calls, databases with blank fields. In the end, the man behind the orphan ledger became a ghost story whispered in financial compliance circles. Until one final file surfaced, and with it a new kind of reckoning. The USB left in the Dropbox. In late 2019, a mid-level clerk at Paraguay's Unidad de Inteligencia Financiera, UIF, the Financial Intelligence Unit, received a standard anonymous drop. A flash drive, no label, no note. At first glance, it seemed like garbage data, CSV files, nonsensical codes, partial account numbers. But buried within it was a macro-activated Excel workbook, protected by a 6-digit password. It took 3 months to crack. What they found was an audit, but not a bank. It was a personal ledger, written in Alvaro's style, modeled with the same annotation seen in earlier scans. But this one was different. It didn't list accounts. It listed names. The list of settlements. The workbook contained 119 individual names, corresponding ID numbers, rural bank accounts, dates labeled start, transfer, and finally liquidation. Each name had a settlement value ranging from $3,200 to $56,000 USD. And in every case, the liquidation date preceded one of three things: a fire, a business closure, a sudden cross-border transfer to a Panamanian intermediary firm. The implication: these weren't criminal records. They were balances settled by Alvaro himself. The ledger acted like a personal mission log, tracking when funds were returned, when names were cleared, and when the math aligned. The final tab in the workbook held a single line of text: ledger complete, all debts settled, no one left behind. The pattern behind the quiet. Investigators determined that over $4.8 million USD in off-record bank transactions were funneled through Banco Agricola Rural between 2013 and 2015. But here what made it strange. Most of that money didn't disappear. Instead, it was deposited back into rural family accounts, used to pay off old government tax liens, or transferred into educational trusts under the names of clients' children. This was not a standard fraud ring. It was a correction, an informal rebalancing of financial wrongs orchestrated by someone who understood the books better than anyone else, and who had stopped trusting the institutions meant to oversee them. The theory no one will admit. Unofficially, whispers inside the UIF and certain corners of the central banking system suggest a radical theory: that Alvaro Núñez uncovered systemic misappropriation of public cooperative funds, likely funneled through shell agricultural subsidies and fake accounts under the supervision of Dossier and others. And instead of going public and risking his life, he quietly began to reclaim the funds, distributing them quietly, carefully, and deliberately to the people they were taken from, which would make him not a thief, but a kind of financial insurgent, a vigilante in a worn cardigan, settling scores by adjusting numbers instead of pulling triggers. The final page. In 2020, a small school in La Capilla, once near bankruptcy, received a donation: 87 million guaranis, roughly $12,000, enough to build a new roof and upgrade computers. The sender was anonymous, but the check was issued from a trust labeled Los Libros Haifanos, the orphan books. It was traced to a private Panamanian bank. No owner on record, but the signature on the transfer request: A. Núñez, written in blue ink. The school kept the money. No one asked questions. And Alvaro, if alive, was never seen again. Reflection: when crime is correction. The story of Alvaro Núñez defies category. He wasn't a conman. He wasn't a whistleblower. He was something in between. A bookkeeper who saw his role not as passive but redemptive. Not in court, not in headlines, but in decimals, in ledgers, in line items no one else noticed. He used the tools of bureaucracy, data, forms, signatures to quietly undo harm. Was it legal? No. Was it justice? That depends on whether you believe in rules or in balance, and whether you believe that some debts can't be paid in money, only in correction.